Greetings, everyone. This is the first session for 2022 in the Power Virtual User Group Technical Webinar Series. So my best wishes for a happy, healthy and successful new year to you all. I'm really pleased to have Nigel Griffiths join us today. He'll be covering the PowerVS Simple Starter Pack for AIX, including AIX 7.3. And this is our 112th session in the series. I'll let Nigel introduce himself shortly, although I'm sure most of you know him already. Just a quick reminder to everyone that questions and comments can be entered via the chat window, and also this session is being recorded and a replay and a slide deck will be made available later, hopefully later today. You can find details of all past sessions on the PowerVUG info page at ibm.biz/PowerVUG. So without any further delay, let me hand over to Nigel Griffiths. Over to you, Nigel.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm Nigel Griffiths. This is my 30th year at IBM. That means I'm old and tired. And I got various job titles. There's been some discussion about whether you can call yourself an intergalactic commander or not, but I go by the name technical staff member at the moment. Although I do a lot more work with the sales team here in the UK. So let's get started. We'll talk about what is PowerVS in a minute. It's a service on the IBM Cloud that allows you to start a virtual server. But the point I'm making here is how low can we get? How cheap can we make this? Well, it came as a bit of a shock to me. I thought, well, everybody tends to think cloud's going to be cheaper. Then you work it out. And actually, cloud is very expensive. But then I found this is very cheap. If you want a small virtual machine to run AIX, then it costs you, well, you can, depending on the currency, £2, $3, or €3 a day. So sort of the first approximation. If that's not one of your currencies, you probably know the exchange rate to your local currency. And that's for 24 hours. If you just wanted a day's worth of playing with AIX, perhaps to improve your systems admin skills and give something a try, just to do an experiment, then you'd only need 8 hours, and it's 1/3 of that price. Or if you just wanted to do a morning, it's even half of the yellow prices up in here. This is pretty cheap. Now we tried to get IBM to give it away. No. They want to make some money, and it actually does change your mindset, right? If it's free, then you'll say, yes, I'll have hundreds of them, right? And then you may not ever use them. But if it's just, the first penny is costing you money, then you only switch it on and use it when you actually want it, because it's burning up your money if you just let it go. So if you've got something to do, then it's worth doing it. And I was looking at this because I have a lot of people complaining that they can't get access to AIX. Linux, you can stick it onto some cheap second-hand laptop and give it a go. For AIX, you can't do that. You have to buy a power machine, and some people buy old power machines on eBay. Then they can't get a whole copy of AIX because AIX isn't public domain. But now, for 67 pence, they're going to have a whole day of doing some training and learning on AIX. This is my initial reason. So let's go into my slides. I have no idea how long this is going to take, so let's go for it. So PowerVS, Power Virtual Server, is like your own power computers in your computer room, but they're actually sitting in the data center that belongs to the IBM Cloud team. And then you rent some CPU, memory, storage, network by the hour. And you're in charge. If you want more, then you just ask it to switch on more. And if you want less, or you want to delete it, you can do that as well in a couple of seconds. Now, IBM in this service manages up to the operating system. If you want, they'll throw in your first operating system on a disk for free, do it for you, but it's up to you to manage that operating system. In this case, it's AIX. You could use IBM I, for example, or Red Hat or SUSE or something in these logical partitions as well if you want to, but I'm an IBM AIX guy, so that's what we're talking about here. And in that cloud data center, we have some Power 9 computers. We have the small ones, the S922s, and the pretty big ones, the Enterprise E980s. And you can select anywhere between quarter of a CPU, that keeps the price down, up to 143 CPUs, a gigabyte of memory, which is probably not enough to run AIX, to be honest. Up to 100 gigabytes of memory. If you want more, you talk to us and we'll make sure that it's available when you arrive. Storage, 10 gig, up to many terabytes. You can put your virtual machine on the public internet, if you like, and then you can SSH across from anywhere in the world to log into it. And then you have, or you can do a private VLAN, VPN rather, and that means that from the virtual machine you've got in PowerVS, it's connected on the network directly into your computer room and running your IP addresses. So it's no different to the actually being in a computer room. It's just a hop away on the network. Okay, so where are these data centers? This is a moving feast. This is the end of last year. 14 data centers around the world. It's done on demand, where we find where our customers are. And maybe it's a little bit based on cheap countries or something. I don't know. I thought there would be one in California, but there's not yet. But I think running computers in California is expensive. There's a lot of taxes or something like that there. But these are growing all the time, and I'm sure this chart is slightly out of date by now. Where do you actually get to it? You type into your browser cloud.ibm.com. Probably easy that, and you have to find the Power Systems Virtual Server. Now, did you notice the name change there? PowerVS, Power Virtual Server, but there's a system stuck in there in the name when you actually get to it. But we'll come back to that a bit later. And where better to run a power system in the IBM Cloud? To be blunt, there are other cloud vendors that claim power-based computers, but they are embarrassingly amateur. IBM understands the big computers, their power processors, and they make available some of the really advanced features we have in power systems where our competitors don't. They may be very limited to a particular ratio between the CPUs and the memory. They can't switch on some of the fancy features we have in Powerland. So be very careful when they say, tick, yes, we can do power computers if you want them. If you dig under the surface, you might find that they're quite lacking in what they can supply. Now, I've already said that my initial reason was to get people on AIX, even if they're not in a first world country. If they can get on the internet, then you can get hold of a copy of AIX, and in 30 minutes or so, you can be up there playing with your own copy of AIX, doing some dangerous commands, ruining disks, connecting disks and disconnecting them. Can you get the data back? Whatever you want to do. There's also a group of people who are ISVs, and I feel like I'm a little ISV as well. I write these NMON and NJMON performance monitoring programs. So if I want a copy of AIX, I could use PowerVS as well to get access. But I could develop in whatever language I want on AIX and test the different AIX versions, for example, with my piece of code, make sure I can support my customers. Perhaps you're a solution developer, maybe working for a big company and you're trying to work it well. If I put this, and this application together, will they actually work together? I mean, we don't know, right? There's a risk. Well, I can give it a quick try on somebody else's computer and throw it away by the evening, and then I know that it will work and I can recommend that to my customers. Perhaps you're using system tests and benchmarks. You don't have enough compute power in your test cell to match the production database. Well, you could temporarily switch on all those resources, load up your database and do a benchmark run, and then you can throw it away. You don't have to buy a computer and have it sitting there all year if you just want perhaps a system test and a benchmark for a week or so. Okay, so in all these cases, PowerVS is an excellent solution. Now, next couple of slides here. Psychologically damaging. I'm not sure if it's going to be that bad, but it does make you think. And I've been known that cloud's been there for quite a few number of years, but it wasn't until I actually tried it and thought about it that I appreciated that there are some major differences. The first thing I noticed that cloud seems very expensive. We were joking around the office, I don't want to pay for a new computer every month based on that price, but the trouble is with cloud, there's a whole lot of things you're getting for free. Now, when you use a cloud service, you're accessing, you have no access to the physical server. I've had, for practically the entire 30 years of working for IBM, my own computers sitting in a computer room somewhere in IBM, and I can access them and do whatever I want with them at all times. Once you're in the cloud, you can't go up to your computer and polish it and make sure the connections are good or do anything to it. You've lost control of that. All the features are available by the graphical user interface. Some advanced features, particularly networking, you may need to use the API to do that. And you can set the size of your VM, the number of CPUs, the memory disks and networks attached to it. You can add new disks or add new networks after it's already running, like you can with AIX. And then in the IBM Cloud, there's hundreds of services that you could plug in and start using. So it feels limiting, but initially that you haven't got your own machine, but then you feel it feels good, right? I haven't got to put this into a 19-inch rack and plug all the cables in and get it all working. Somebody else is doing that for me. And it means you can't worry about things. Now, ironically, my computers are in a computer room in IBM South Bank, right in the center of London, and they're going to be moved to IBM Hursley, that's out in the country near the south coast. And we're having to deal with all these things, right? I have to worry about, have they got enough electrical power supply in the new computer room? Is the air conditioning working? And we'll cope. Physical security of the computer room. It's easy to take these things for granted, but somebody's doing it. Updating the system firmware. You also have the adapter firmware that you need to look after. Upgrading the hardware with more CPUs and memory. Setting up the VO servers, managing those, so you're upgrading them as new VO server software comes out. Then you got the virtual networks and the virtual disks in the VO server to work with, and connecting them to your client LPARs and things. Maybe you have to do some tuning of the VIOS. Well, you can't do any of that in the cloud. There's the HMC setup and management and updating that. Then you've got to think about skills and training of the people that are operating the computers. Perhaps it's a production 24/7, and you have to have shift work sorted out. There's hardware error reporting. Who's catching those things being thrown off by the servers when they spot something's wrong? Somebody has to sit there watching that list every now and again and make sure there's not, it's not reporting disk 28 is about to fail. And if you're not watching, then you'll actually lose your data. Things like remote restart. If the computer fails, where does it go? You don't have to worry about that. And you have the network and storage, the physical infrastructure to look after as well. So once you get to cloud, all of this is not your problem. It's really quite nice, isn't it? I'm still having to deal with this when I'm moving my computer room, but eventually I guess I will not have computers in the computer room, apart from when I'm looking at the prototypes and the early ship programs for the new computers coming out. I do actually like to see the new computers and take lots of pictures and things like that. Okay, so there's a couple of things that aren't available to you as well. You can't place your virtual machine. You can't say this new virtual machine is going to run a database. I want it on server 8. You can't do that. You have to say, I want to start a virtual machine of this size, and the PowerVS software will decide where it goes. At the moment, you can't switch on AIX active memory, a way of active memory expansion, AME, and that allows you to double the amount of space memory available to AIX. That's not available. Now, at the bottom it says some of these could actually change in the future, and it's largely done by client pressure. So if a lot of people ask for, I want to use AME, could you add that? Then maybe they will. So do shout if you want something to change. Live partition mobility, you can't decide that. You can't decide to move your LPAR. In fact, if the machine that you get allocated on has to come down, the PowerVS people will move your LPAR to another machine for you. And they won't tell you that they're doing this, but they'll just move it out of the way. Shared processor pools and shared storage pools, they're not available. The LPAR modes, on a Power 9 machine, it can run in native Power 9 mode, but it can also pretend to be a Power 8 and a Power 7 machine. When you haven't got the choice of that, you would be up in the default mode for the machine you're actually on. Huge memory pages, I haven't used those for a long time, but the high performance guys can use some of those. The physical adapters, you have nothing to do with that, so they're all virtual networks and a virtual storage, and you haven't got access to a physical or a virtual optical device. So you can't put a ISO image into your virtual optical device in your VIO server because you have no access to your VIO server. So some of these things you would like. Some of these may actually change in the future. Do shout if you want things to change. Some of them will be very easy to do. The next thing is that if you're like me and you just want a tiny little copy of AIX and you're looking at PowerVS, that's sitting in IBM Cloud, which has hundreds of services and features and software that you can plug in, and you're looking at like a great big JCP digger with hundreds of knobs and whistles that it can do, lots of things to do, and all you want to do is plant a rose bush, right? And so you can get lost in IBM Cloud if you're not very careful, and that's exactly what the problem I had when I went in and started using it. Okay, so yes, how do we? The answer is, well, if you use PowerVS and a tiny VM, then keep the cost down. And how do you get started? And what I did when I did it for the first time, it took me many hours to work out what was going on, and I captured my experience and the answers in a series of YouTube videos, and they've been out for a year or so, 90 minutes in total. You can find them there. There's a link if you want to write that down quickly, and you can actually find out my experience and my hints and tips. So I decided, I mean, this is 90 minutes, and when you got an hour today, I can't just show you the whole lot. So I'll give you the edited highlights. You can watch those videos as we go. So first of all, I have an intro that sets the scene. I've used a couple of slides from that already. And then number two is an introduction, actually creating the first VM hands-on. You'll notice the second video is half the length of the waffle in the first one. So it's actually really quick to do it, and it probably can do the whole thing in 5 minutes flat if you're not trying to describe what's going on. Right, the next one is fun with disks. As with AIX, if you want to do some system admin, you want 4 or 5 disks and create a, you have a root VG and then a data VG, and then you want to bring it online and offline and add disk to it and make file systems and all that sort of thing. So you need a half a dozen disks to play. Well, that describes how to do that and how to disconnect them and leave them there, or disconnect them and delete them if you don't actually need the data anymore. Now, the next thing is, okay, you have a raw copy of AIX. There's pretty loads of things you actually want on your AIX pretty quick. And we have 800 open source tools. That's in the AIX open source toolbox. And by default, that's already connected and available. So you have C compilers and Fortran compilers and Apache and Perl and Python, all sorts of things in there that you may want to try and use and get some experience with, and as you're setting up your applications or whatever. Remember, I wanted to teach people AIX, so the next one is a video about that, and it's only a small one because it points you off to a web page in my AIXpert blog with hundreds of references to places to go and find out information. I think there's 34 AIX videos, which is, again, me telling you how to get this feature switched on and working and what it's all about. And some of them are very basic, some of them are more advanced topics. Then I thought, okay, well, I've got a version of AIX installed in my virtual machine in here, but it was one level out of date, the update that came out. And so how do I upgrade it? So I was struggling a bit with this because I tend to use an old-fashioned way of doing that. You're downloading the files from Fix Central, and then I checked the documentation for PowerVS, and they said, you just type in this Suma command, and it does it all for you. I know Suma's been around for a long time, but it's really clever. Maybe I'll be using that more often in the future. So we can quickly upgrade our copy of AIX to the latest and best version with the latest fixes and better performance and all that. So these are my videos that you can go and have a look at for the full details. There's actually 2 more videos. There's one here, the review and update. I learned a few things after I made those previous videos, so that's in there. And this was actually created for the Technical University that we ran last year. And then I've got another one in here, which is about using AIX 7.3 in PowerVS. And I'll actually cover that a little bit later. But again, there's a video there with more details on it. I checked up yesterday or the day before, 6,000 people have looked at these videos. 3,600 people have looked at the video. So there's a lot of people out there getting some benefit out here. So let's now get a bit more practical. A little bit of a bluntness warning here, right? IBM wants you to have hundreds of very large virtual machines and spend lots of money. Well, we're here to make some money, all right, at the end of the day. Of course, if you just want to have a quick dabble, you don't want to spend a lot of money. So it's a sort of trade-off in there. So Power servers are, serious, fast, scalable computers, and the website is built to handle this. But if you just want a tiny copy of AIX, it can be quite difficult to get that going and up and available. So in that series of videos, I cover these things, what I call my 6 mini hurdles. These are things I got to and I thought, oh, what happens there? I'm not sure about that. I don't like the sound of that. So the first one is you have to create an IBM account if you want to do anything more than just to look around some of the high-level screens in IBM Cloud and PowerVS. And when it asks for your account, it's only asking you for a name, an email address, what country you're in, so it can sort of guess what currency you might like. It's no big deal. You do the same thing with lots of websites. The next thing you have to do is just find this PowerVS, and you have to look in. You find there's a button at the top as you log in. It's called a catalog, and you can search for Power Systems Virtual Server. And note there, there's my arrow going here. Yes, systems in here. If you look for PowerVS or Power, it'll give you all sorts of websites. Loads of Intel-based services think that they're powerful. I tried to persuade them that they take all the other references to Power off the catalog. So if you typed in Power, you get to the ones that the Power server guys would actually want to get to. But just remember that systems is sort of a silent. We get silent letters in English, don't we? And we've got a silent word in this case. Then what we want to do is find out how much does a small machine, virtual machine, actually cost. That was okay. I found that, and you could get through it. There's some quirky things in there, in the fact that all the CPUs and memories and disks and networks are all in a rate by the hour. Well, that's not how people buy computers, is it? But if you like, you're renting these resources by the hour, and you have to do the maths whether you want to look at a day price, a month or a week, or a yearly price. But it comes as a bit of a shock when you find out, a gigabyte of disk costs 0.0003 per hour. You've no idea if that's cheap or not. You have to keep doing the maths to work it all out. Now, the next thing is a bit of a psychological hurdle. You have to add your credit card details if you want to try AIX in PowerVS. Ironically, when I first went in, and I presume it's still the same, it says, would you like £200 or $200 free to spend on anything you want in here as a sort of welcome and to get you started? Unfortunately, those $200 don't apply to Power virtual machines. So I tried for days trying to get that to work, and it doesn't work. It's not actually available because Power computers are a more expensive resource than $100 of time running, taking one of the services that's available inside IBM Cloud. So you add in your credit card details, and of course you're a little bit like, whoa, giving IBM permission to take money. Now we actually do behave ourselves. I actually used a rival, I won't give you the name, cloud hosting machine, and I typed in my credit card details, and within like 30 seconds my wife ran up the stairs and said, what the heck are you doing? We just had a credit check from that, people checking that you got money in the bank accounts. Well, IBM doesn't seem to do that, but if they do, then don't worry. They're just trying to make sure if you create a great big virtual machine that's going to cost £100 a day, then your credit card details are actually credit worthy, and they can let you go for a month and then ask for the bill at the end of the month. But you'd have to trust us to do that, and I haven't seen IBM put a foot wrong. Okay, the next thing is you have to create a resource. How vague can you make it? You have to create a resource. What's a resource? Well, I call these projects. So you're actually going to say, I want to use this particular computer room, and when I create a virtual machine, I want it to go in this center, the data center. And you could have more than one. So I have one resource for the UK and one resource for, I think it's Dallas in America. And then I can go into that resource, and when I create a virtual machine, it goes into the right place. The resource also has a connection to currencies and things like that. Now, if you're a big company, you want resources on projects, right? So you'd want different resources for, perhaps this is your web services. These are your internal database. This is your applications over here. Here's your test and dev, and you'll get a different bill for each of your resources. So you can see which part of the features that you're using in IBM Cloud are costing you more or less, and you can manage the account to make sure that somebody's not gone bizarre and didn't realize 1,000 CPUs cost a lot more than one. Right, and when you get past that hurdle, you create this resource or project. It does actually take 2 or 3 minutes to do that. You have to wait for that to happen, and then you can create a virtual machine, you can access it, and you can delete it. And that is really easy in comparison to everything else. Now, what you tend to do is you create a virtual machine and you play about with it. That's good, and you log off for the day. You come back in the morning, and you think, how do I find my virtual machine again? And the answer is you log in. And I was joking with JT earlier on. You click this icon here, which is a stack of plates, and then you find this icon here, which is a stack of broken plates. They're lists or something, but I don't know. But you're looking, you can actually find this thing near the stack of broken plates called a resource list, and in there you'll find your resources, or your projects, as I like to call them. Okay, so this is the price estimator, the cost estimator, and you can see you click on these various things. So it's in Washington DC. I think that's the default one, which there may change because everybody tends to end up in that one if they don't know any better. Then that data center gets quite busy. Then you choose a big machine or small machine if you want to reduce the price. Small machine, shared CPU. You know that would be cheaper. You're entitled to so much CPU power. Then you click on AIX, and it doesn't matter what flavor of AIX, it's the same price. This price will actually include the licensing for AIX. It's not a separate bill that you're going to get. Cores, they cost money, so we can quite happily run a quarter of a core. And normally I think it says 2 GB of memory. I like to use 4 because I like to do some caching and boost the performance of AIX. Then you're going to select some disk storage. Now this is where I went wrong the first time. You don't actually need a disk for your first initial logical partition. That's because when you select AIX, it's going to give you a disk with AIX in it, and that's enough disk to run with. This is extra disks if you want it. And the number of instances, you might say you want 4, maybe you're running a service, like you want many copies of it, so they're backing each other up, like web front ends or something, or maybe you want to have 4 different applications and you want all closely coupled together, and you have a choice when you actually create the virtual machine of whether you want them forced onto different machines for higher availability, or you want them all on one machine, which is better for network performance. But you click on the cost down in here and you'll get the prices as we saw before. But here's the text list. Wouldn't it be nice if they gave you that in a little spreadsheet? But no, we can't do that. We need to use fractions of a penny. We have no idea what that means. I did look at the price of IBM I. That does cost quite a bit more than AIX. But that's because IBM I comes with all sorts of things built in, and they've got a DB2 database, I'm going to put inverted commas, free with it, and all sorts of application building software and all that in there as well. So it's not like a fair comparison against AIX, which is just the operating system. Okay, when you create a virtual machine, same questions. I talked about the number of instances. You can ask it to insert into the operating system a SSH secure shell key. That's nice because it means you don't have to upload it over the network, which is always like slightly security conscious. You click on the AIX button, but then it'll say, okay, which version do you want? Or you can click on the disk image that you've created with a particular AIX setup the way you like. Public or VPN, terms and conditions as you'd expect. You hit create, and you wait about 5 minutes or so, and your virtual machine will be up and running. So how do you actually get into it? Well, on that graphical user interface, you click on your particular virtual machine, and then there's you do an open console operation. It starts off this little Java thing. I wouldn't say well know what's going on here really, but it gives you a telnet or a terminal, dumb terminal session into it. Okay, and then you log in as root and you get straight in. And you think, whoa, that's not very safe, is it? But this virtual machine is not on the internet. It's only on the internal network inside Kubernetes, inside the IBM Cloud computer room. So the first thing you do is you add the root password, and only then will it allow you to SSH in from the internet. And you can find the SSH IP address from the graphical user interface to directly go into it. And this is, these are all covered in the first two videos. So what do you do when you get in? First of all, you can OS level 1 is S, and you can see this is AIX 7.2, Technology 5, Service Pack 1. It's in 2020 week 38 where this version of AIX was released. So that's good to check. Nmon is probably the second thing you do. Oh, that's maybe a bit odd there. And the only thing I think of it in here, you can see it's got SMT8 switched on. This is a Power 9 machine. And when it's just taken over, right, it's just the operator, there's nothing running at all apart from a shell. It's using 7/1000ths of a CPU just to keep the operating system running and the interrupts and all that. Down in here, this is just showing that it has previously set up for you at the open source toolbox, yum search Python 3, and you get all the, there's 40 or 50 Python packages in here. Then you can say yum install Python 3, and I'll go and install those and all the prereqs. Really great. C compilers are probably the first thing I actually want, because I usually want to compile some C code up. And you can do a SMTY TCP IP and see the actual internal address there. Oh, sorry, that's the IP address for the getting into it. So, yeah, so I'm going to say, we've done the first two videos. I forgot what this slide was. We've already done this once. So we covered the first two, and then we got disks, open source tools, sysadmin, and updating AIX. You can go and watch the videos to pick up how to do that. So let's now talk about PowerVS with AIX 7.3. AIX 7.3 is just out. Well, it came out in December. I think it was the 10th or the 11th. So it's been out a month. So I guess most people that are on this webinar have already tried AIX 7.3. What else do you do over Christmas when you've got all your relatives driving you nuts? Well, that's what I do. I go and try some new software. So, yeah, arrived end of last year, and the beta version was available on PowerVS, and now we actually have the GA version is available on PowerVS. At the moment, it's not in the standard list of versions of AIX you can have pre-installed for you, but you can still have it in PowerVS, and we'll show you how to do that. And this is the way I think things will go in the future. Rather than you getting special permission, you download a 7 GB file with AIX with .iso. You have to move it to a computer, and you have to boot off perhaps a virtual optical device, or put it into a network installation manager server, and then build in a virtual machine and installing it. You can actually just have direct access to it. It's already pre-built for you. Now, this is actually going to use the same process as migrating your own on-premise AIX, your own copy of AIX in your computer room. If you take a copy of the root VG, which is sys B, then you convert it into an OVA. There's a new command called make OVA, a special image which has the make system B data in it, and then some extra pieces saying this needs to sit in a 25 GB disk, for example, and what else is it actually in there. Then once you've done that, you upload it to cloud object storage, and the people from Cloudland just call that COS, and you're thinking, what's a COS? For me, I'm old school. This is an FTP server, right? It's highly secure and it's pretty fast, but it's just a way of uploading a big file. Then when you want to use that AIX image, then you copy it from the cloud object storage into your own local resource or your local project. So that appears as a disk thing, and then you can say, I create a VM and use that new special disk that I've already prepared, and it will just boot up that copy. Now, in this case, the AIX 7.3 developers have captured the image. I mean, they've got them in their test in their labs, and they've created the OVA, uploaded it to COS. So well done, team. They've done the hard bit. Now, I only say that's the hard bit because I haven't done it myself yet. I'm quite sure it's quite mechanical and obvious when you get there. I've actually got a link to the page somewhere in this deck. Right, so capture the image, that's been done. Uploaded it to COS, that's been done. We have to copy it from COS to our resource. Then we create a virtual machine, but name this particular new boot disk. And then we start, we actually hit the create button. It creates it and starts it up. And then it's business as usual for the login in, remote, SSH, and we can start exploring AIX 7.3. Now, this process assumes you already have used PowerVS, so it has some hands-on experience. Well, just watch my videos and have a go, and you can easily get there. Now, before you actually start this process, you have to ask to get access to COS, the Cloud Object Storage, and that special prepared AIX image. So you go to this website in here, you fill in your name, company, country, email address, your role, it was you don't have to say that you're one of these. I put in Intergalactic Commander and it says that's fine, yeah. And then it says, what do you want to test? Well, you have to click on Power Virtual Servers, and then you click then I'll say yes, and then you'll get email with the details in. So this is the upload process in here. Running AIX makes this be OVA image is a make OVA that does that, and then upload it into the COS Cloud Object Storage. And I actually got here a link of the way the reference page for how to do that. So that's already been done for you. What you'll get in email is where to get that. So this is the different regions of the IBM Cloud world. This is the name of the file, although it's GA. I think it may have changed its name. And it's in a bucket. Don't know what that is. And then it has these HMAC access keys and secret keys. And I think, what are those? And they're just password. Right? It's a fancy name for a whopping great password to make sure it's absolutely secure. And these are in hexadecimal, so that's probably capable of covering more than the number of molecules in the known universe with that length of key. But there you go, nice and secure. And I'm not allowed to show you those, otherwise you wouldn't register, and we want you to know who you are. We're not going to do anything about it. We may send you an email saying, could you give us some feedback? So, Cloud IBM Com login. Here we go into here. Here's the plates in here, which is IBM Cloud. Here's the broken plates, the resource list. This is going into me. I've actually done it already. Here are my two resources, or what I call projects. Then I've gone in here. So here's UK. This is one resource. This is the virtual server instance. Oh, there's something you have to be careful about. We've been calling them, well, at least called them LPARs, didn't we? Logical partitions, which was a bit vague. Then they became virtual machines, but the cloud guys call them virtual server instances. Or if they're clever, they use VSIs. How many VSIs you got? Where is your VSI? It just means virtual server. And here's an example of one. This is the one I was showing you earlier, the AIX 7.3 TL5 Service Pack 1. And it's AIX. You can see some of the details in here. And this is how you create an instance. If you go into actions, it'll come down open console, and that's how you actually get access to it. So in this case, I've gone down the list in here. That's the instances. Here's the boot images and of my running ones. And this is before I started. So you do an import image, and you just fill in the blanks from that email address in here. Here's the this is the name of what I want to call it. I think I changed that after doing this. my second attempt. But here are the details that were in the email. Yeah, this is the name I want to see it as when it actually downloads it to my resource. It says actions are limited during the import. It's going to copy 25 gigabytes across the planet and drop it into some space in your resource. So that does take some time, and it's quite a long time. I recommend you go to lunch and have a good pudding with it, so an hour and something, and eventually you'll be there. Once you do an update button on the boot images and it's complete, then you can carry on. If it's not complete, you can't use it yet. It will be locked. Right, so there it is. Yeah, I called it something slightly differently when I captured this one, and it's 25 gigabytes. So when you create the virtual machine, you're going to have a disk with 25 gigabytes in it. You don't need a second disk unless you want one. So that's available. And then we're going to, that's the copying over to the project. Then we're going to create a virtual machine as normal. In the boot images section, we click here on AIX. It says, which of these pre-prepared disk images would you like? And it includes your own ones that are sitting in your resource. So there is the one that I copied over. You select that. Everything else is the same as creating a normal virtual machine as before. But this is AIX 7.3, so things are a little bit different. When you come to that login, you are suddenly told, no, that's not a good password. And here are the rules. So 8 repeat characters, 2 alphabetic, a lowercase and uppercase, and non-alphabetic character, and 1 digit or a minimum of 1 digit, and a special character. Now no special character. So there are some characters you can't type in, but there's some non-alphabetical characters that you must have one of, and I think they're the ones on the top row where the numbers are. You know, the pounds, the dollars, the percentage, the and, the star, and those sorts of things. They are the non-alphabetical characters. So I started typing in Mary had a little lamb. They said no, that doesn't obey any of the rules. But then you say, well, Mary spelled with a capital M, and Mary had 6,666 lambs with an exclamation mark at the end, and I think that was enough to actually say yes, that was okay. So you do have to think about those. Now I told you can switch off this feature, but to be honest, it's a pain in the neck, but you know it's the right thing to do, don't you? If you want, this could be on the internet, and it's that complicated password that's protecting you from being hacked. So it's big and it's complicated, and the first thing you know with big complicated passwords is you write them down. So make sure you put them somewhere very secure, so nobody else is going to see what your magic passwords. I have a password management program where I put them all with master password. Okay. The couple of things you do immediately with every AIX, unless you live in Austin, Texas, is change the time zone and the date using a SMPTE, and probably have to change the time as well. At the OS level, it comes up like this. Now, this 00000000 means it's either a beta copy of the AIX as it came out before it was actually released, or this is what's known as the Gold Master. And you are not meant to be running Gold Master code. Because they create the Gold Master, then they test it and test it and test it. There's a few little things that they find is not quite right. And rather than making another Gold Master and have to run all the tests again, they produce the first service pack. So you really need that first service pack. So I went off to fix it and downloaded it. I guess I could have used Suma to do it. And then I got to here, service pack 1, 21 week 48 is when it was actually released, the service pack, or you could use Suma. Now you're up to something not 0000, then you got a good copy of AIX that's safe to operate. I use Edmon, and you're on I think it's a Java dumb terminal emulator. And oh dear, look, it runs out off the side of the 80 characters and loops around. Oh, this is the most beautiful program in the world. Somebody in development changed it and didn't realize what it looked like on an 80-column screen. So I want everybody on here to raise their PMR, say, please fix that. They could just say, current megahertz, press R. Forget the 4, and then we're okay. It's going to fit. But anyway, maybe that's me just being fussy about my baby, as I'm not in charge of it anymore. To be fair, AIX 7.2 does the same. I didn't notice until recently. Now, if you use one of those other AIX 7.1 or 7.2 prepared images for you, rather than this one for the AIX 7.3 beta, you can just type in yum, list Python or something, and it'll tell you all about the Python packages. But Python didn't appear to be here, which completely foxed me. I thought that there could have done that, but it turns out, after much banging my head on the wall, it is there, but it's in opt freeware bin. This is where the open source software tends to go for AIX, because we're trying to keep the AIX commands away from the open source commands, so you don't overwrite AIX commands with open source, and then you can't go back to the AIX ones. So they were there, and if you type the whole thing in, that's fine. So what that means is they didn't put it in the path so that you know that these are there and you can work out which ones you are using. So you're aware of the fact. Now, you could yourself put opt freeware bin in your root path, and then you could just type install. Now, we're meant to be using DNF, aren't we? Which is a Linux joke, as far as I can see. So here's me actually trying install GCC, and I forgot I'd already done it the previous day. And it's quite funny when you type in GCC, which is the GNU C compiler, and you do the whole path name. It says yes, and the first thing it says, fatal error, no input command, input file. Well, that's fine, but the fact you haven't told it what file you want it to compile is hardly a fatal error. Nobody's going to die because you forgot the rest of the command. But anyway, I went through the yum list tells you all the packages available. We've got 852 actually sitting there ready to use. Go and have a look at those if you want to use some of them. Very nice. This is a sort of new feature for AIX 7.3. Default install Python 3. Which is actually very current. I mean, I haven't seen anywhere else that's using 3.9 yet, so that's good. It'll be good for quite a good time, and that's important because IBM is pushing Ansible as a means of scripting things and updating things and installing software and managing your computers. And Ansible tends to assume Python is available on all its endpoints. Well, now it is, and we've got a good Python 3. There's also the bash shell is installed for Linux people. I would make sure you don't set your root user to use that by default. There's some things in AIX which use the corn shell, and if you're using a bash shell, then some important root features may have a problem because you're running the wrong shell. Over the next couple of years, everybody work out what those are, perhaps, and that won't be such a concern. But I just type in bash if you want to use bash as your shell from now on. But it is there and available. Now, I was going to put in here 24 slides about all the marvelous features of AIX 7.3, and I decided, hang about, that's already been done. So here's the places to go and look for these. Steve Sibley's a good friend of mine. He's been around for years. As Mr. Power. He's now a vice president. We had lots of title changes, but there we are. And he's got a 1.5 minute video saying, wow, 35 years of innovation. And here's 7.3 with more innovation in it. And the other virtual user group, the Power Systems, run by Joe, actually had a session in, I think it was, November the 4th. You can actually see on the front in here. And in there you have Maria, oh dear, that's spelt wrong. That's Ward. Oops, typo my part. As the product manager for AIX. Carbonet, we refer to him as Mr. AIX, distinguished engineer, and Brian Vale is the AIX architect. When new things come in, he's making sure that this is thoroughly thought through so we don't have, well, like Linux when it does things, say, oh, right, we're going to have compressed memory. 3 different projects go off and do compressed memory, all differently. And it turns out none of them were good enough to actually meet the criteria for Linus Torvalds to be put into the basic kernel, where people like Brian make sure we actually design it properly. It's going to run. We're going to do it. It will be high quality product and will be available as a standard offering for many years to come. So these guys really know what they do. They've got lots and lots of slides about the new features, the new commands, things to expect, and what's going on, and a little bit looking into the future as well. So I decided not to repeat all that. There's some things where you can go and get more information. This was a bit of a shock. AIX 7.3. It's just a blank screen with 3 square blobs on it, as far as I'm concerned. The what's new is actually very good about what's new. There's the first line in that is what are the new commands. So that's what you really want. You don't want somebody saying, oh, there's a marvelous feature that does this and this and it will solve world hunger. What you actually want is what's the command you type in to access this new feature. So there's the new commands, and the installing is very thorough and all the various methods that you can do and install. Some of those will be very similar to the past 10 releases of AIX. The troubleshooting was actually the AIX 7.2, but then I guess if you're running into trouble, it's probably due to a standard old problem or something going wrong with the way you did it. Okay, the next thing to note is AIX 7.3 is fast. Now, I don't know about you, for the past 20 years, every time I install AIX, we just know it's going to take 20 to 25 minutes to install. I reckon CPUs go faster, but there's more packages every year. So it's always taken about 20 minutes to actually do an install. Well, after we broke away from floppy disks, anyway, that was like a 2.5 hour install. So yesterday I did a raw install, doing it the hard way, not using PowerVS, optical DVD on a Power 850. It installed in 11 minutes. I mean, that's like half what I was expecting. I was going to have a nice tea break, and finished by the time I was about to go and get my cup of tea. And another thing I noticed is it won't install FTP and Telnet, which is about time, isn't it? If those two are running in your computer room, you have no security whatsoever. And so you have to manually go into the installer to switch on that if you want them. I guess you could do an install P to get them if you want, but nobody wants that. If I was running a production computer room and I detected FTP or Telnet in the network in the computer room, I'd have an alarm bell running off saying, we are being hacked, and somebody would have to fall on their sword to say, yes, it was me. And there we go. Now, while we're talking about AIX in here, these are the 4 versions of AIX that you are really meant to be running now. Anything other than these, you're out of date and maybe out of support. And 7.1, it has the clock running. We've got 14 months, April next year, and 7.1 will then no longer have regular support. It may have extended support, short-term option. That may be okay if you forgot to upgrade it in time. You've had plenty of warnings now. It's not an excuse for inactivity or laziness on the system admin guy's part. It allows you to buy some time to remove your technical debt. I have a couple of big customers, very big customers. They have a couple of thousand copies of AIX 7.1 running on Power 7 computers. It's an enormous technical debt. It's going to cost them a lot of money to upgrade all those machines and AIXs to get out of that, and they should have been doing that on a regular basis. This is all in my humble opinion. I feel better for letting you know. Okay, so I've got a chart in here. We've got here we are in 2022, which just trips off the tongue nicely, doesn't it? 2022. Here's the Power 10 computers that we've just released end of last year. We've got some mid-range and scale-outs coming out this year. Power 10 computers can run in Power 10 mode. Well, duh, that's what you'd expect. It'll also run in Power 9 mode and Power 8 mode. So it'll pretend to be these machines. It actually... I'm not sure it's the right word. It lies to the AIX as it starts up, and if it's running in Power 8 mode, it doesn't admit that Power 9 is available or even an option. And AIX says, okay, you only need Power 8. Okay, well, I know what to do to work on that, and off it goes and runs. The same thing with Power 9. It has the previous 2 modes available, and Power 8 has the previous 2 available. So these customers of mine are running AIX 7.1 on Power 7. That means you can't do live partition mobility from this combination to put it on Power 10, because when you get here, Power 10 doesn't know about Power 7 mode. So when you do live partition ability, you'll say no, the target machine can't support your a power mode that you're running your logical partition in. So they actually would have to take this and jump to perhaps Power 9, and they shut down the operating system. They can change the mode that it's running in to Power 8, and then they can jump from and start it up again, and then they can do live partition ability in Power 8 mode to Power 8 mode on Power 10. But so it is doable, but you have to stop the operating system, which means throwing all the users off, shutting down all the applications, and it's an outage. Okay, and I'm noting down here the various operating systems in here, what mode they're actually supporting and being supported. Now, I said on the previous chart, it's fast, right? So here's a test I did on my Power 10 machine. So here's AIX 7.2 on running in Power 9 mode on a Power 9 computer. And this is a well-known benchmark that I wrote called Wiggly Worms. It's rather unusual. You can't compile it with the optimizer on, otherwise all the code disappears. And my little wiggly worms that run across the screen do sort of 10 billion moves a second. So we had to slow it down with a great big loop in it. But here it is doing 206. And then it did live partition mobility from Power 9 machine to Power 10 machine running in Power 9 mode. And it doubled. Now, I'm not saying all your applications are going to go faster on Power 10, but that is nice to see for this particular case. I think my program lines up very nicely with some of the strength of the SMT threads. Okay, that's not the point of this slide, right? I then ran the same test in Power 10, but running AIX 7 is the beta code. It's pretty near the gold level. And you can see, so it's on the same machine in either of the modes in here, doesn't make any difference. And it's going, a bit faster. I don't know, percentages in there, 40, 10% faster. Same code and everything else. And you're thinking, how did they do that? And you talk to Carl Burnett, and he says, yeah, we're pretty clever around here. You know, we've been working hard on AIX 7.3 for quite a long time. And they're doing things like tuning device drivers and reducing the path lengths to get work done. They've also serialized a lot of the device drivers. Instead of taking global switches, they do things in parallel, particularly with things like fiber channel and Ethernet. And so they've got quite a few things in here that's just going to speed up everything. This really has to be just library tuning. The C library has been tuned heavily, and it's making use of it, because the only thing this is doing here is using a cursors library in the libc. I guess it's doing some network IO, getting the characters out to my copy of VNC. Anyway, good sign. We should get a performance with it. There's no promises of how much you get, but there's every chance of you doing this. Right,
Nigel, if
yes.
I might interrupt, just we are at the top of the hour. We've got
Yep.
30 more minutes, so no panic. There's been a couple of comments in the chat, so just read those out and see if you have anything to say. So Mike says a little bit of advice: whatever storage tier you choose for your root VG is the storage tier you then have to use for any new volume groups. So if you want faster disk, then start off with tier 1 for root VG.
That is true, yeah. But the tier 3 are SSDs, which are pretty fast disks. The tier 1 are NVMe disks, which, okay, they are faster, but if you're just mucking about with the system admin command, then you'll never notice. And yes, all right, if you're doing a benchmark, that is worth knowing and worth getting right.
Sure. And then Emil put some information out from the AIX 7.3 release notes regarding YUM and DNF. AIX 7.3 does not support YUM as RPM package manager from the AIX toolbox, but DNF can be installed from the toolbox and must be used to manage the RPM packages. So that's in the release notes.
Okay. as far as I'm concerned, as a simple user, they're exactly the same command. But yes, DNF is the approved new version of Yum, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I shouldn't encourage the use of Yum. Good point.
Okay, that's it for now. So yeah,
Okay.
I'll hand back to you.
Okay, right. So I'm known as the father of Nmon, and this is really weird for me. There's a few things I'd admit that we got wrong in Nmon, but we did start 25 years ago, where computers were a single CPU, yeah, and very much one operating system on one whole computer. But had some problems with Nmon that the output format was pretty much set in concrete, because if I changed anything, it would break all the other tools, my own tools and other people's tools that they're using. It's limited the number of stats it collects. They were really designed for performance benchmarking, maybe a bit of tuning, but there's hundreds of stats that you may actually want these days. And yes, in 100 years' time, somebody look back and say, why did the world end up with 25 billion .nmon files? And the answer is, it was me. I'll put my hand up. And that has created quite a lot of data management issues in the past. So NJMon was there to really fix that. First of all, we're going to put all the data into a database, and we can manage it, and we can squeeze it and summarize it and those sorts of things if we want. We have tools that will do dynamic browsing, so they look at the live data rather than having to wait till after the N1 file has been created. And we're going to use JSON as the main way of saving the data. And as I learned, that's a very natural data format for Python. In Python, it's known as a dictionary, and you can load, without trying, you can load 40 megabytes a second of JSON data into a Python program to go manipulated. And JSON is self-documenting largely because it has the name and then the number, unlike Nmon, and it handles new data. Nmon was never good if you had disks that came and disappeared. That wrecked the Nmon file. Same with networks if you change them. Or mounting things like NFS mount points and things like that ruins the data as well, where NJMon will cope with all that. And I'm going to throw in a few comments on nextract as well. If you've got NJMon running, you might as well add nextract as well. Right, so I'm not going to read the bit down the left. NJMon and nextract are free, open source. NJMon for AIX is 2,500 lines of code, and NJMon for Linux is 1,500 lines of code. It's not complicated. If you want to learn a bit of C or something, you can just dive in. And nextract's written in Python. That's only, from memory, about 600 lines of Python. So these are quite small. They're just the data collectors. We're not trying to do any clever manipulation of the data. We just capture it from the operating system and either write it out in JSON format or we write it out in line protocol. Now, we've got to have somewhere to put that data. So rather than just say, there it is, there's the JSON, go and do what you want, nobody will ever do anything with it, and my project would fail. So I had to select a time series database and a means of graphing it. And the benchmark guys in Montpellier recommended, and I went and have a look at it, InfluxDB and Grafana. And yes, they are very popular and very easy to get going and get started with. Both of those, they're free. Again, there's an open source version if you like, and you can just download it and run it. They also both have a fully supported version. They call it the enterprise version, so you have 24/7 support and assistance, and you can hire consultants to come and help you if you really get stuck. And they both offer a cloud service. You don't have to even install it and run it in your computer room. You can do that on the cloud if you want. And I do recognize, we'll see some others, there's other time series databases and tools available as well. They can mostly use JSON formats as very good common denominator across the tools. Okay, so you're going to install on the VO server, AIX, or Linux, a small tool, one little file, and data gathering agent, if that's what you want to call it. And you put that, well, we'll come across in a second. You point that at the Influx database, and it'll save all the data very fast. Then you use Grafana. You log into it. It creates a page like this. This is a dashboard with all the different sorts of information into it, and then you can look at your NJMon data. So this is just an example of some data in here, all the sort of graphs in here. We've got pie charts. There's a load more as well. We can have lists of things in here. And this is one that I created. This is NJMon for Linux, and it's got NFS. It must be off the page somewhere further down. And you can just change very quickly up in the top left, top right in here. You can select, the last hour, the last day, the last week, the last month, the last year, last 10 years if you've got the data, and put in a range if you like. And so it'll automatically redraw the graph to do that. So you can look back in history very, very quickly. You can also say, look, this bit over here, I want to zoom into that. You click down, drag it across and let go, and it will zoom into that part of the graph. There's something happened at that point of time when you want to investigate it, and that will actually change all the other charts to the same timeline as well. Now these graphs in here, you can't quite see them on this picture. There's a little triangle at the bottom corner. If you click on that, you can just drag it and make them bigger. So you can zoom in if you want. Or you can click on the header line in here and say view, and it'll make this graph the entire screen. And then once you've done that, there'll be a little back arrow open here. You click on that and you come back to this screen. So you can zoom in, see some fine detail, and then zoom out again. If you don't like the color of these things, you can just click on the key down here, the color there, and select it off a palette. Have any color you like. You can have things that are stacked. Just think, yeah, doesn't actually see it here because everything is user time in this example. But you can have stacked charts or of them all on the same axis. And you click on here and you can say edit, and you can change the measures and the statistics. So if this was just the blue graph, I could go here and say create a new line. It's in the kernel stats for blocked processes, and you just say okay, and it just draws that graph for you. It's very much under your control. So my dashboards are just a starter pack. You can have exactly what you want. You can move everything around the screen. Very powerful. This is what Grafana's adding to the picture. Now you might say, wow, that's really complicated and that will take a long time. And here I'm going to say, no. The data agent, 30 seconds at most. Now, land NJMon in one of these two directories and add a line to crontab and you're done. It will just automatically do everything else. I told you about the open source for ARM and AMD 64. That's what some people call Intel. Of course, AMD invented the 64-bit version of Intel, which is ironic. And you can also have them running on Power 8, 9, or 10 now. And these open source ones are compiled by these guys at Power DevOps. I've got to know them quite well over the years because I use their code. You can run them on a Raspberry Pi. I've done that at a technical university. 20 people running quite happily on a Raspberry Pi. You can get second-hand laptop to run it on. That's fine. I prefer to run it on RHEL because IBM is meant to run Red Hat. On Power is my favourite combination because that's where I feel very comfortable. I could do it on AIX as well, but a lot of my users are probably going to go for a Linux on Intel or a Linux on Power. Once you've downloaded, install those. Both of those take maybe 30 seconds to do that. You have to download a dashboard from grafana.com. And all in all, if you're fairly slow, it's going to take you 30 minutes before you can see your first set of graphs coming up. I didn't cover this. It's in this example, it's slightly off the top of the screen. There's a button you press, and it gives you these are all the virtual machines that we're collecting data from, and then you can flip between different virtual machines very quickly to have a quick look at what's going on. And we're collecting all the data I can possibly find at the end of the day. If you find some measures, some numbers in AIX or Linux that you think are important, and you can point me at where the data is, I'll just add them, and I get lots of user requests to do that. This is describing the grafana.com dashboards. That's where you find the dashboards, and you go into Grafana and say import dashboard 253, and then it just appears and you can start using it. It will ask you which database you're connected to in case you didn't name it in JMon. Now, things are a bit more complicated than I let on. So we actually have two versions. The original NJMon, the J here means JSON data. And we can start NJMon pointed at a daemon process that we're running normally with the influx database here, and it catches all these incoming data flows and uses the Python client library for InfluxDB to just pump the data into InfluxDB. That's all this thing's doing. You can also write out a JSON file, which can then be used if you don't want to use InfluxDB. That's not your thing. Splunk or Elastic are the two other big time series databases. Splunk tends to be for very big companies, and it does cost a bit of money. And they have something called the HEC, or the HTTP Event Collector. This is how they collect data off your virtual machines. And they can do that for a JSON file. They watch the file grow and scrape off the data and push it into Splunk. On Elastic, they have something called Beats that does a similar sort of thing. If you're a Unix person, you'll know what tail minus F does. It just sits there waiting for a file to grow and then shows you the new data on the screen. Well, Beats is doing a similar sort of thing and pushing the data to Elastic. Then I worked out how to directly talk to InfluxDB, and so this is where the NIMON, this I in here means InfluxDB, and this is called line protocol, which is line by line data rather than a JSON data structure. And so I've got two different versions of the code. One creates JSON and one creates influx line protocol. This is the one that most people end up using if they want to use InfluxDB, because you don't have to muck around with the daemon process in here. It's a lot easier to set up to go straight into InfluxDB. There's another time series database called Prometheus. This is popular with the container guys or Kubernetes guys. Personally, I don't like it very much. There's nothing wrong with it. Typically, containers don't last very long, so Prometheus is used to create, store the data for thousands and thousands of containers, but not keep the data very long. They'll be thrown away in tomorrow or something like that. Typically, how it runs, but it is liked by the Kubernetes and container people. The other problem with it is it's back to front. All these other ones, we collect the data, immediately push it in the database to make it available. Prometheus doesn't like doing it that way. It wants central control. So what you have to do is have a processor here that captures all the data stats and sits there waiting for Prometheus to get in contact with it and then sends the data. That's a lot harder to write, and it's not the way that NJMon or NIMON is built. But the people that wrote InfluxDB have something called Telegraph, and this is like a universal converter. So it has like 40 different formats of files and log files and things that are import things. And then it has hundreds of different ways of pushing that data out. So it might be MySQL databases and oracles and all sorts of other ghastly tools, or even comma separated values files, or whatever you want to push the data to. And you write a 4-line file saying the input's going to come like this and the output wants to go like that, and you just start it up and it runs. It's a brilliant piece of code, and we can use that. So it saves the NJMon or the NIMON data coming into it maybe once a minute, and whenever Prometheus gets in contact, it just gives it the latest copy. So that actually works quite nicely to do that. Okay, so that means we've got, they're all the big time series databases. The others are not quite so popular. Although open source, something may come along soon. Later on, I noticed that Telegraph can actually feed directly into Splunk and Elastic. So that may be another way, rather than going through the NJMonD Python program and creating a JSON file and then monitoring that file and pushing it in there. We can actually get it straight there with a Telegraph and push it into Splunk and Elastic, as they have output interfaces to both of these. Now, if you've got InfluxDB and Grafana running, then you may as well have a look at an extract. It's a Python program you just run once for all your machines. It's using the HMC REST API. And so it just talks to the HMC, doesn't know collectors to deal with. It just logs into the HMC and drags the data out. The HMC knows about the flexible servers processors, and it knows about the VIO servers, and it knows about the logical partitions, and it knows about how the servers are put together. And so it knows quite a lot of information. It doesn't know very much about the OS. It works equally with IBM I and AIX and Linux. It will understand how much memory you've got, but no idea what you're doing with it. It can see from the hypervisor how many compute cycles your operating system is using, but it's no idea what you're doing with it. No user system time or anything like that. No idea. But it's very good for server, virtual machine, the virtual I/O server, like virtual networks and disks. I've never seen any other way of getting this data, and even data from the hypervisor. So this is a pretty good way of doing it. It's one script, and you'd have to run the script once for each of your HMCs. You don't have to do a pair, just one of the pair to get the data off it. And you can go look at the video, but there's 40 or 50 graphs of data we can get out of it. Actually swamped with data. You'll have to decide which bits you actually want to focus on. So now we have NJMon and NExtract feeding data into your time series database, and you can graph and compare and contrast the whole lot in one go. So what's new? What I've been working on in the past 9 months or so? Well, the first thing is we used to have two different programs, the NJMon and the NIMon. They're only about 3 or 4% different. I have a bunch of functions in the code that you say, we're going to save this measure, which is like CPU or something. And then here are the stats. We have 4 floating point numbers, user, system, idle, wait. And then he says, okay, we're finished with that measure. And then NJMon will format that in JSON and push it into this great big buffer that we're going to send out when we've finished. And NIMon does exactly the same thing, but it does line protocol into the big buffer. And then that gets pushed when all the data is collected. It goes out in one go as an update into a file or an update down a socket to another program, InfluxDB or NJMonD. So I merged the codes, and so it works out, are we in NJMon mode or are we in NIMon mode, and all the other code is the same. It's just going around the operating system getting the data. So we've merged the two. So what we now have is one command with two names. With Linux and AIX, you can use the ln command to link one binary file and give it two names. That actually happens quite a lot in Unix and Linux. Everybody's familiar with the VI editor. Well, there's the one called View, isn't there, which gives you a read-only version. That is the same program with two different names. When it starts up, it says, what name did he use? And it works out whether to let you update the file or it's a read-only file. And we've also, by popular request, we have a thing called a workload manager that's been in AIX for years. Turns out some big customers are using that feature. So I added those back in. Look, some of my old code examples of working with those, and we put in quite a big fix for the fiber channel stats. One, I have two big customers using, sorry, it's not the customer that's big, it's the company they work for is big. They're big multinational organizations. One's financial, one does white goods products of high quality that you may. We've got a broken dishwasher, and we may upgrade to a version of the dishwasher, as they were very good quality. But anyway, those two customers are actually on the early ship program for Power 10, and between them, they had the E1080s in September, and by December, between them, they had bought 30 machines, the E1080s. So they're very big customers, and they're going to buy more in the coming year. And so we always want to please them, if you like, and they request things. And sometimes you think, oh, that's a bit strange. And sometimes you think, that is a really good idea. I love it. I want to put that in. Why didn't I think of that? But anyway, next features that was in September or something. We're now working on version 10 in beta, and we moved to InfluxDB 2. We were running at InfluxDB 1.8, and it has a new REST API, and it's taken me a while to get the hang of that and the way they change things in InfluxDB, but that's underway, and the data's being collected. That looks okay. Some people wanted the IP address of where the data collector was running, which, okay, I don't know why. You got the host name. That should be unique, isn't it? But some people run some very strange networks. We've also put in a feature for disks. If you add and remove disks, then they're automatically handled. So that is being tested. For the new Power 10 machines, we've added the ARPA ratings. For AIX, we can give you estimated ARPA for the size of your logical partition. That can be very useful for capacity planning. On Linux, this is my favorite file that I hate in Linux. It's just so embarrassing. You have the proc file system has a lot of the stats in it. So what would you think is in disk stats? That's right, it doesn't have disk stats in it. It has all sorts of other things as well. It has you remember the old days where you used to have partitions on disks? And so on an old laptop, you'd have a boot partition and the main partition and a swap partition or something. Well, because it has both of those, and if you look through the disk stats command, you end up with twice the I/O you would expect, because it's monitoring at the partition level and at the disk level. Now they've decided to put in things in here like map files, and if you have multi paths to your disks, the same disk appears twice, and all sorts of stuff in there. So I eventually worked out how to find out which one were real disks, brown spinning disks or SSDs. And then I put that in, and that's working fine. But then some customers say, no, I actually want everything that's in disk stats. And they say, well, you can't add them up and work out what your disk is doing. But no, they wanted that. So we've added a D option, and you get a new, this is the measure, disk stats. Disks is still there as what you expect. And then we find the SAP HANA guys, they use BT RFS. So I think this is better file system or something like this. And it's a very complicated way of working out which are which in the disk stats file. So we've gone through that, and so the SAP HANA guys can see the disk I/O. That's what they'd expect. And if you're looking at the mount point, your file systems on AIX, the mount point names are slash, home, temp, those sorts of things. In Linux, there's some odd sort of file system device which may have home and temp in them or may not. So we've got an option here, -M, to make it AIX, Linux look like AIX with the mount points in it. We've done some testing and made some fixes for the second beta. We've added the manual pages and the help information when you type in a -help in here. Now we've gone around, there's another one called nmeasure, and that allows you to add your own stats. If you have a shell script that works out the database has done 10,000 transactions and had 18 rollbacks, well, if you can get that in a shell script, you can then call the nmeasure command, and it adds it to the njmon database in Influx. So you can add your own data, which is really nice. It's a very simple command to use, and then you can graph your data along with the njmon data. And then we're asked by one of our big customers that they wanted this thing called a partition UUID. And I thought, what on earth's that? And how do you get that? And they told me ls atra capital EL sys0 has that at the bottom. And I think I couldn't find any information about it at all. And they said, well, that number is unique for this LPAR or virtual machine. Even if you move the virtual machine to a different machine, a different type of machine, or a different computer room, that number never ever changes. And that's why the Cloud Management Console keeps track of a virtual machine. As it moves around the computer room all day long, it still knows, oh, that's the same one as we had before, and I can add the stats together and give you the graphs of your CPU usage. It's not documented, but they were then trying to compare the njmon data with the data that comes out of the Cloud Management Console, and now they've got the key that actually join them together. And while I was looking through the output of the sys ls atra command, auto restart, that's nice. Will the virtual machine reboot if there's a failure on the server or you power on the server? That's good to know. We have the firmware version. I was surprised in AIX we didn't have the firmware version. There we are. We have Xive, the external interrupt virtualization engine. That came in with this version of AIX and on Power 9. This is a new way of doing interrupts. It actually saves quite a lot of processing power. So it's good to see if that's switched on. 1 means it's on and 0 means it's off. And this number, the bottom digits in here are the serial number, but the 06 means something. I think the 06 means Mexico. I've seen O2s and O9s, which are Poughkeepsie, another manufacturing plant, and Montpellier is the O9. So I have to try and get a list of those, but you can actually see where your machine came from. Where was it manufactured by looking at those first two digits in there. On the to-do list is go back. Right, go back. I have to double check that the Grafana dashboards work okay with InfluxDB2. That's some way sort of let's try that tomorrow night or the weekend. And we do have a couple of Splunk users, and I need help with working out how to send data straight to Splunk. And I was thinking of having a new command, an SMON, for the S is there for Splunk. And that's going to take us a longer time to work out how to do that. Because Splunk isn't open sources, and I tried to install it once and failed. I probably need some help in running Splunk or getting access to Splunk, and then we can add that to our toolset. Some of our big customers like Splunk rather than anything else. And that's it. Now, so we're done now. Phew. Okay. So why are you still sitting here? You've got so much to do, right? You can try AIX 7.3 on PowerVS, and we've got NJMon to go look at, and Extract to go and have a look at. You've got 10 hours of videos you've got to watch. It's time you're all logged off. Over to you, JT.
That's a good point. Thank you very much, Nigel. Yeah, whistle stop
Yeah.
tour of AIX 7.3 on and PowerVS there, along with the NMON and NJMon, etc. tools. So thank you. We'll stay on for just a minute or two for questions, if there are any. There was a question regarding getting started with IBM Cloud and access for learning and practicing. So I did post a link to the Power Virtual Server page where you can get started. And then there's a question about if you have any videos for installing NJMon on, say, the iOS. I know we covered NJMon back in.
That's very easy. You log into your VIOS using the padmin user, and then you type in the OEM setup env command, and you're now the root user, and then it's exactly the same as how you installed it on AIX. Easy.
We did also cover NJMon in a previous PowerVUG session. It was session number 82, which is back in 2019. So some things have obviously changed since, but some of the basics still apply. And then you've got Nigel's videos here as well. That
if you want to give PowerVS a try, watch those first two videos, the starter pack and the creating your first VM. That's hand take you through it blow by blow, keystroke by keystroke.
So a couple more questions that have come through. Can you configure Grafana to send alerts on the data?
Yes, you can. It's a core function of Grafana.
Cool, great. And can we also use these tools for IBM I partitions?
No. If you use nextract, you'll find some information about your IBM I, but it's not got the internals of data structures and the use of memory and all those sorts of things in there, because it doesn't know that level. IBM I has its own tools, and you quite often run sessions in this VUG.
That's right.
About how to collect that data. I forgot what's the name of the core command to do that.
So Performance Data Investigator is really good, and the recent session on the new navigator for I did include some information on the new look at performance. So look out for that session, a replay of that session.
Now, it is an interesting question, because if we if we had a good IBM I programmer, they could, and the IBM I keeps the performance data in the DB2 database, I believe.
Yes.
So if they extract the data from the database and then write JSON format files, then we could have a collector for IBM I. Of course, the data will be different. They don't see the computer the same way as we do, so the stats will be different. But it could be included in a I put it in a different database in InfluxDB or any of the other tools. But then you should be able to have a Grafana dashboard that shows you that AIX is using user system idle time, and IBM I is using core kernel and application layer or something for its stats. But I don't know enough about IBM I to do that.
One day, perhaps. Another question's come through. Is it possible to use Telegraph with InfluxDB to send data? Rainer says we use this combination on some of our servers.
Yes, the Telegraph will connect anything to anything. It's like a universal translator type thing. IBM did have as a part of an advert once this universal adapter, a great big like a football with every single combination of socket and plug could be plugged into it. It's like one of those, so it's a very useful tool for generally translating data between different systems. Yeah, that's a very, very powerful tool.
And one last question we'll take now. Is it possible to create CPU pool usage stats using NJMon, NIMon with Grafana?
Absolutely.
Go. Well,
Yep.
thank you so much, Nigel, and thank you to all our participants who joined us today.
Yeah, thanks for sticking with us.
Yes, we are going to be running more sessions in the PowerVS series, so just watch out for those sessions. Going to stop the recording now.